Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. It's Chris here at the Edge Report. I've got with me Kassi Burns. Kassi, this is the second time I think that you've been on the podcast, and I have had the great pleasure of joining you on yours. Welcome
That's
back.
right. That's right. Thank you for having me back, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. So, Kassi, we'll start with the professional side of you. Senior attorney at King and Spalding, eDiscovery practice. Important for today's world, just like we were talking about backstage. Tell the world what that means, what eDiscovery is, and what you do for a living.
Yeah, so I actually have a TEDx talk where I talk about this a little bit, but I will tell you, for the lay person, I am an attorney that's firmly at the intersection of law and technology. So if you think to litigation between parties or an investigation by the government, usually that entails some level of alignment of or assessment of facts to the law and trying to make a decision at some point related to was there wrongdoing, was someone at fault, etc. And to get to facts these days, you know where that comes from? It comes from data. It comes from client data. A long time ago, that would have been maybe a banker box or something like that. Now it is literally terabytes of data. It is a bit of an unknown aspect of the legal profession. Not many legal professionals even know that much about e-discovery, but it's a deep and narrow aspect of the life cycle of litigation or investigations where we become very knowledgeable of client data and we know workflows and processes around that data to create efficiencies to the review. So Chris, I know you have some, in your past some experience with this. Maybe 15, 20 years ago, there was like no efficiency to it. We were literally imaging drives and reviewing everything. And it evolved over time due to machine learning and textual analytics. So, email thread suppression onto technology assisted review. In essence, using machine learning in an adversarial setting in a defensible way, saying, because of this technology, I only have to review X percentage of the total because we can assess that that's all that's really relevant to the facts of this case. And that's where your obligations lie in those instances of you give to the other side what they're asking for them to help build their case. It has to be relevant for the given matter. And so like I've dealt with that and it's becoming increasingly challenging even though our tools get more sophisticated, the data we're dealing with gets more diverse and challenging. And so, yeah, I do a lot of work in SQL-based databases and Excel, and it's a very process-driven type of practice, but also you have to understand the procedure of where that fits into the broader litigation and strategy around it. So it's working very closely with Merits Counsel. And it shouldn't be surprising that my interest was definitely piqued with I would say the broad array of emerging technologies, not just generative AI, which is the du jour top, emerging tech, but even blockchain. That I think is what sparked our initial connection a few years ago of, just very fascinated with blockchain technology. And a lot of times, like for me, my interest is what are the points of failure with these idealized new technologies and how do we mitigate that? Because that's part of what you do in e-discovery. Processes that you develop that are based on technology and humans using the technology. Sometimes, 200 attorneys being involved in a given matter, and you have to mitigate the points of failure. And that's usually on the human side, not as much on the technology side. So it's just fascinating to think about. So
It
that's me
is.
in a nutshell.
That's where we share a couple of those commonalities. One is definitely our interest in technology. That's how we met, I think, was one of the courses that was out there sort of post COVID on NFTs or smart contracts and blockchain technology. But we also share that I was on the commercial real estate side of eDiscovery and putting together document review facilities back when they first started. So, part of my work in workplace strategy and portfolio analytics was to figure out what impact technology assisted review was going to have on primary, secondary, and tertiary review stations because we didn't want to overbuild. We didn't want to underbuild because at that point it was still pretty human driven. I mean, it was taking that
Brute
first
force.
round was really bringing paperwork into some of the new technologies that were out there so that then it could be flagged and indexed and tabbed in terms of relevance. So
Yeah, and I think maybe another way to think about it, even for the audience, just to put things in perspective, as Chris is talking about, like I've managed as many as 200 attorneys on, one e-discovery project where we had to review client data and receive data from the other side to help us build our case and give the other team what they needed. That I'm not joking. 200 attorneys in a conference room and, some of the conference rooms had no windows, and we were working really long hours too. And so if you think about it, knowing that this is a machine learning type of workflow, what we do is not unlike what some machine learning trainers are doing out there where they're labeling so maybe social media related algorithms where maybe they're labeling, certain type of content is not being allowed or not. That's driven by human looking at things and labeling it and the machine learning from it, and then you validate and you refine, and that's very much what we do in eDiscovery. We do it all the time, but we also do it in an adversarial setting. So the other side may say the quality has to be up to a certain muster. So that's what makes it a little, I think, intriguing.
No, it totally does because it gets into the data quality. There's, so much conversation we can have around the synthetic data now around ML and how a lot of AI is built and how it learns and how RAG happens. And like right now, a lot of these models are only as smart as the internet tells them to be. Yet people are
Mhm.
putting a lot of weight behind it, thinking that, if it's a social issue and you want to know what Reddit is talking about, it's pretty accurate. But it's not smart yet. We're
Mhm.
still pretty nascent in artificial intelligence, but the understanding of machine learning and training data and the purity of the importance of the data that goes into this modeling is something that I think will be emergent for folks as they continue to adopt, use artificial intelligence in their workflows. So it's going to be real fun to watch industries way outside of what you do specifically engage and adopt artificial intelligence. Like I said backstage, it's really we're living an immutable record. Every keystroke, everything it can be collected and measured now.
Yeah, I mean, like our toothbrushes have metadata, like our washing machines and other things, have metadata that all can be potentially tracked. So, that Internet of Things, which let's be clear, like Internet of Things was a very trending e-discovery technology back, maybe 10 years ago. I remember that was like the topic du jour back then. And now we don't talk it anymore. It's pervasive though. It's there. It's everywhere. I mean, from all the appliances to vehicles of transportation. Again, like my toothbrush judges me. If you don't brush like long enough or the right way, it will straight up give me the stink eye. Like so judgmental if that doesn't happen. And luckily I do not feel compelled to connect that toothbrush to my phone, even though I could. But if I did, then someone would potentially have a record of every time I didn't brush my teeth well.
The insurance companies in particular, when it gets into health and wearables, that's the thing that freaks me out. We can go down that path for days in this conversation. That I struggle because I love the technology, but I hate the privacy. Um,
Yeah.
People are. Have you noticed how many terms of use statements have been popping up everywhere? And
Mhm.
people have they're not like, as soon as I mention it to people, they're like, yeah, they are everywhere right now. And it's like, it's not just cookies anymore. That was GDRP, or
Yeah, I
GDR.
mean, you see
This
a
is
lot of
terms of use.
right, and states are really starting to pay a lot of attention to this, and not just California. Texas has been very active in pursuing privacy related, litigation. So there's a lot of focus, and I don't know if it's the AI effect. I don't know if it's AI made people really truly realize how important and valuable data is. And those of us who've worked with it, who've been stewards of it, we realize it, but it really is important. And something that a discourse that I hear some, especially in e-discovery. So, stepping back, e-discovery used to be like all technology server based. You didn't have a cloud based. We didn't start with cloud based email. We had server based email, and then over time it moved to a cloud based system for various reasons. E-discovery is the same. We had server-based technologies that we use, and then over time we've moved to cloud-based technologies. And because of that, there are, some concern of privacy and preservation and who could potentially have access to that. If there's an obligation of someone managing those services or that data is under some sort of in their own matter litigating something, the potential of that being subject to, scrutiny or access. I hear people talking about, and also the privacy concerns some people have around some of these AI technologies. I'm hearing some people talking about should we go back to on-prem? Should we go back to server and move away from cloud? I don't know if you're hearing that. I'm hearing it. I don't know how I think the average consumer is not probably going to do that, but I do think that there are some people, because so much of this technology is open source, they may be compelled to do it. But I do think the average consumer, the convenience factor is going to, be the driving decision factor. And it's frictionless, like, and we talked about this with wallets, right? Cold wallets, warm wallets. I think a challenge I see in Web3 and blockchain technology is the effort to get onboarded. And maybe it's a little bit easier now, but it is not frictionless. It takes some effort to get. I remember feeling, and I said this before, I felt like Frodo, like walking all the way to Mordor, trying to get my everything set up just because I wanted to buy an NFT. So a first time NFT buyer, you have to plan for that.
Fortitude.
You
It
have to
takes
plan for
fortitude.
that.
That's why I say explorers use compasses, not maps. Like, there's no mapping Web3. You have to, like, just figure it out and, try not to get rugged along the way, which we all probably did. I know that I've got an ETH wallet somewhere out there. It was not what ETH is now, but I mean, there was like 16 ETH in it and it's gone. So, I mean, think about that. It's like what, 3, 4 grand an ETH now. And, there were 16 of them in there.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great topic. Like I was talking to a friend of mine, and that's where like the points of failure, as technology matures, what are some points of failure with blockchain? Because there is like that rosy-eyed view towards it. Oh, it's immutable and it's blah blah blah, and it's never gonna get destroyed and la la la. But like, how many people are gonna be good at managing their seed phrase in a trust and estate situation? I was talking to someone who manages estates, trust and estates, and the number of attorneys who work in trust and estates, a very trad practice of law, a not very tech-forward practice of law, and yet we're talking about digital assets where the point of failure that's allowed to access that is 0. Like, there's no margin of error. You either have it or you don't.
Yeah.
And
Use no
how
coin.
how many digital assets are going to be bricks?
It scares the shit out of me. I have, without going too far into our personal family matters, I have people in my family that I love and trust who are elderly now that have positions in Bitcoin. And it's like, it was fun. It was hobby like, it's significant investment now. And it's like, there's no, to your point, like, it's trustless. It's in a trustless system, but at the same time, it's also not secured by anything. It's just no keys, no coin. So yeah, huge emerging opportunity there for sure.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about. Like, there has to be some sort of technology component to that. But again, you're dealing with a practice group that tends to skew maybe older, maybe more rural, smaller firm practice. And so like that's a knowledge, and that's a knowledge gap of technology that is potentially having impact to a growing number of people holding assets out there.
That's a perfect bridge because this is where I wanted to go a little bit. Two things I want to talk about today to make sure that we don't get stuck. One, I want to talk about what you're doing
Mhm.
now, currently, recently, that you announced that I saw, which is what made me reach out to you. And the other is the Genius Act, stable coins and real world assets, because that's law now. So, we can bridge into that conversation of stable coins and RWAs if we want to a little bit, or we can stop and you can tell the world what you're doing and then we can come back to it.
Yeah, I will be perfectly honest, and I think this is a reality check for anyone who wants to know everything about emerging tech. Spoiler alert, you can't. You can't know it all,
Yeah.
even with all of the AI helping you out. So I've not really been following that stable coin. I know it's happened, I know it's passed, I know, I think I know the SEC is like scaling back some of their, claims about NFTs being legal or not. I would say I've not followed it closely enough to have a strong opinion of it. For me, it seemed like there was some interest and innovation in Web3 building that stalled out, I think because of some of the regulatory, efforts that were going on. And I would suspect that that's gonna change now, and maybe there was a cooling off period that maybe bad actors are not so laser focused on this, maybe not, I don't know, I really haven't been watching that, but, I would say it's probably a more normalized, like, especially in the context of maybe NFTs or things like that, but it's not an area that I've been focused on quite so much. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, though,
Well, as
whenever.
a builder, I can tell you that we went from persecuting and prosecuting at the level of the SEC to now encouraging and building. So I'm a
Mhm,
builder and I've been a builder from the very beginning. I like to explore things enough to understand their complexity and know when I need to step away. Kind of like being a framer of a house versus being an engineer behind the framing.
mhm.
I'm definitely not a subject matter expert, but I build so that I can appreciate and understand the complexity behind things. And one, we are absolutely seeing a divergence with ML and cloud. We're seeing a lot of on prem because people are starting to realize that, as you mentioned, the points of failure, that dependency and the ability to have exposure to terms of use or potentially have a model that's being recorded or otherwise observed is really a bad idea. So moving AI back to on-prem is starting to happen, and air gapping and allowing for sandboxing to be there so that you can not only not pay for that cloud access every time you're moving information to and from it, but also to air gap for security and cryptography purposes. So that's one thing is there's a massive movement back to on-prem for AI and ML specific. And secondly, stable coins and real world assets, it's about disintermediation. So, when you look at just the peer to peer exchange that got me involved in currencies and the remittance process in finance, um, it's very hard to transfer assets in this world without several layers of complexity. And that's what's so fascinating to me is the transfer of RWAs through stablecoins and through tokens and what that's going to do to a lot of industries. I mean, you're talking about traditional finance or traditional legal in terms of financial planning and financial advisement. Think about what's going to happen to the real estate world when we have deeds and ownership, passing from person to person, wallet to wallet. So that's where it is for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that I've kind of talked about, and I think about, we are a society that's moving away from, 20th century entertainment to 21st century entertainment, and I think this is me talking personally, we're moving away from the starlet that we, idealize, the movie star going to the movies to we are like increasingly, and this is nothing groundbreaking I'm saying here, but we are increasingly the creators, the content creators. And so I remember seeing a reel where someone was able to see all the VIP people go to the Oasis concert or something like that. And someone was like, oh, well, it's all these influencers. And that is like our version of starlets now increasingly. It's not movie blockbuster stars. It's because people are creating because that access to creation and publication is much shorter, right? I wouldn't be surprised, and this is where I think, like, that this is where I've always found the power of blockchain potentially intriguing, and in the context of deep fakes and NILV rights and things like that. But we want to move towards an authenticated based social media where we do and we engage with content creators through, micro currency exchange for, for the content they're creating. So maybe instead of like a heart like, it's like a little micro amount. And then that can be managed via smart contracts or something like that. Or even the management of NILB rights or potential royalties associated with it. And then again, getting into trust and estates, the post, the trust and estate management of those things, if those rights are extended beyond death, depending on where those rights arise from.
So much to unpack. My God, my brain's up.
So much to unpack. And then even like the validation, the authentication is maybe being through a blockchain technology. But again, that assumes that we can clearly identify what is authentic and not authentic, and how do we define authentic when increasingly content is going to be a hybrid of human and AI created. I mean, that's the real challenge. So,
I think maybe that's why it's kind of moving away from the SEC, because we saw so much around the definition of a security. And a lot of what you just mentioned doesn't necessarily fall into the security world. It can be compensation, but it can have value that is like a community token. And those community tokens don't necessarily need to exchange value in terms of USD, but like it's a Cassie coin, right? And like
mhm.
Cassie world, it's worth something. And I can't use my, whatever Starbucks points somewhere else. And there are decentralized exchanges where I can turn a gift card into something else and let someone skim, and have a, take a hit on my exchange because I see more value in less dollars on the other side of it. But I don't know that that's a place for the SEC. It gets pretty invasive when you start to think of it in terms of governance. When you think about all of these exchanges of community tokens, maybe it's just, remember POAPs, proof of attendance
Yeah,
protocol?
proof of I did POAPs. Yes,
So
yes,
like that's
absolutely.
your like I don't tread on me, like that's like a concert ticket. I don't need the SEC to talk to me about, like, that was like you and I had POAPs together. I think we like went to different events and stuff
Yeah,
online. It's like,
yeah, absolutely.
is that a security?
I mean, and it's a form of a password, a passcode, right? It's giving you access to, a Discord server as opposed to having a password, which
Which is
then of course
valuable.
and then of course gets my eDiscovery brain going. How do you collect data from an NFT gate kept Discord server? How do you do that?
You
I need
don't.
some.
That's why the nerds are out there doing what the nerds are doing. That's why I love them so much, because it's a whole different dimension. It's a new vector of understanding. We're so linear and so one-dimensional in our world that once you go into that world where we just were, where your brain just went patow, that's
Yeah.
it doesn't chart on an XY graph, and it certainly doesn't go from bottom left to top right.
And that's what I think is so intriguing to me because in eDiscovery, we have historically created systems based on the construct of email and attachment, because that is derived from letter and attachment, which is how data, that was data, 20, 30, 50 years ago. Email and attachment is it's still the larger volume, but we're seeing, Teams chats and WhatsApp and Discord server chat and Slack and, Jira and so many other things that are increasingly challenging but still relevant, are, pursuant to the federal rules of civil procedure. And that's what makes our job increasingly difficult. So even though we have all of these technologies to make our lives easier, again, the technologies get more complex, and these are the things we're having to figure out. And it's interesting you saying that you're seeing more on-prem people, like more a movement towards on-prem. We may even see with things like Claude Code and things like that, more self-developed technologies, which that still has an obligation from an e-discovery standpoint to be collected from. So I could see it's not uncommon for our, more established clients who've been around for years, like maybe in the 70s and stuff, when so much was like custom created at the individual business level where they have their own custom systems. You don't see that as much with new companies, but we may start seeing it again because people want to control their data more potentially, and the lift to get to build that out may not be as much. So it's interesting like Battlestar Galactica, everything has happened before and it'll happen again.
Yeah. This is why people in Silicon Valley say we're living in a simulation. And I work so much with workplace strategy folks, future of work folks, because my history came from on-prem, right? I built offices physically for a lot of years.
Hmm.
So, and it's nuanced and we were good at it. So we cared about things like workplace experience way before that was a conversation. And we always stood up for the employee because we were building the space around what we called the seat. Me specifically, if you talk about activity based design, I was very specialized with doc review in creating the document review workstation and what it was and why and those pods. So a lot of science in two screens, one horizontal, one vertical, like a lot of the things that you see on prem, even access control systems and why was all built in for a very specific reason. And it was a very on premise product, so to speak. And it was also because of cybersecurity. You were not going to have cross pollination of data inside of a review pod because you have an issue with it. You have custody of it at that point, and you have a responsibility around it. So we built our facilities to be very specific on-prem activity based design. And we're seeing right now in the future of work discussions and workplace strategy discussions, freedom and flexibility, remote first, distributed teams, or on prem and RTO 5 days a week. And like there's some in between. I don't want to go into this conversation, but I love that when you start to put technology to it, especially when you put blockchain technology to it, or you start to think about the custody of data, it very clearly becomes we're gonna come back to a period of time where we all huddle back in the same place, and it's gonna be so that we can cut off the cords on the outside, go off net, have discussions, create products, and then put them back out. So that ability to turn on, turn off is going to be really, really important, especially as we move into a period of surveillance capitalism. And that's going to happen quickly. So anyway, let's stop there. I want to know what you're doing. I want to know what you're doing. I don't want to take all the time.
No, 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 no. So, what Chris is previewing is that I've been sharing a little bit on LinkedIn that I've been working on in essence a research project with a frequent collaborator of mine. Her name is Olga Mack. She is also an attorney, has worked in-house with Big Law as a product law attorney, has overseen, a legal tech company that was acquired. So she, and she's in Silicon Valley. And so, she's very plugged into that world. And we have started collaborating together, writing a lot about AI. And that was purely another LinkedIn connection, just connecting with her and just really hit it off. And we've written a lot together. We've been on, podcasts together or webinars together. And one of the things we collaborated on was a chapter for a legal textbook that's getting published in Europe about the future practice of law. They wanted a chapter written by US based attorneys because our legal tech is so much more sophisticated, simply because our discovery obligations are much more robust in the US compared to most other countries. And in that trip, since we wrote for it, we were able to present in Italy. And so we went to Italy together and, talked a lot about AI. And one thing we talked about was just, spitballing what are ways we could use AI in a way that no one talks about. And for me, again, knowing there are points of failure and knowing that general may not be the best, that narrow and deep may be the better way, my thought was, why don't we build something that helps attorneys draft these two documents that's part of the eDiscovery process called an ESI protocol and a protective order. And it's two documents that are negotiated in litigation between the parties. And in essence, it's the ESI protocol, which is electronically stored information protocol. It's the document where the parties agree to what they will produce and the manner in which they will produce it. So some of it is like very, detailed technical specifications, the metadata, the load file, is it going to be single page TIFF, multiple page TIFF, that kind of stuff, or it'll talk about whether or not you can redact and what you can redact. So that's like what you produce and how you produce it. And then the protective order is who can see it once it's produced. And that's really becomes important whenever some of the parties involved are maybe competitors. And so you may limit it only to outside counsel if someone receiving the produced data is a competitor. So that's all really important. And as we were prefacing before, data is becoming increasingly challenging, meaning our old school being like 10 plus years old, eDiscovery workflows can become very, very expensive with some of these new technologies. And there's case law that is favorable to mitigate the cost of some of that if the attorney knows about that. So, an attorney like me who is very focused on not only the practice, the process around e-discovery, but case law that comes out about our obligations, I'm very focused on that. It's not unlike an appellate law attorney. They have a very focused area of practice within the broader spectrum of litigation. A litigator, a young litigator, even a junior partner or senior partner may not know that in most district courts, they don't treat hyperlinks as family members at production. And that is a very technical phrase that most people won't know, but I know and I'll know to keep an eye out for it. So the thought was build something where attorneys are because I see as someone in-house who can jump into other technologies working with attorneys, most attorneys want to stay firmly rooted in Word and Teams or Google and G Suite. That's where that is their anchor app to work in. They don't want to go into some of the custom e-discovery, very like robust established tools, much less do they want to get in a new one, right? So we decided to build it as a Word app add-in that just pops up on the side and it really guides the attorney along and the attorney's firmly fixed as the driver in that journey. So it's really kind of like a friend of mine, we've been showing it to people to get feedback. A friend of mine was like, kind of reminds me of Clippy. It's focused initially on at the jurisdiction level, at the district court level, are you including what needs to be included? And then it gets into the bias side, the adversarial side. Like these are the things, and I built it from my point of view. It's my research project with Olga, but I'm building it with my point of view, my persona as at your defense counsel of a client that is maybe involved in a lot of litigation with complex data. And so in essence, it's a RAG-based system, right? We're working with that. We're not building an LLM, obviously. We're working with a foundation model and we're building that data layer for RAG. But we're not just using just raw data. I'm actually, as a subject matter expert, identifying that data layer and I'm structuring it. So when we prepare that internal prompt for the tool, it has very firm instructions because there's a level of certainty that we want to provide. And the thought overall is to flag things and create awareness. And the output is, analysis and suggested changes. And the attorney is still the one doing the editing at the end of the day. That's really what we want, but it's more of like a reference point on the side that they can then control how much or how little they want to edit. But it's really kind of that tech dial-a-friend, that tech buddy that you wanna call, or potentially even specialize it where if certain clients may have certain sensitivities. In-house counsel, they know their data better than outside counsel, so, they may be able to add in a custom, their preferred template and have their preferred data layer that's a priority over our recommended data layer. It's just interesting going through that, learning how to do it. It didn't take me very long to realize just having like a Word document with my recommendations. I wanted to control the process. I wanted to guardrail in that LLM because it does want to creep. It does want to kind of like
Yeah, they do.
do its own little thing. And it's like, no, like that. It has an inclination to be too neutral. And we are pursuing this as it is an adversarial proceeding, but you still have to get to negotiation. But it's been a fascinating project. We're working with a technologist, a developer, and like just the design of it and talking with him and explaining to something that's fairly niche and it's been fascinating to go through. And, ultimately it's a research project. We're hoping to present it, through some academic platforms. But, for my own practice, it's invaluable because And usually I self-fund some of my own, business development because I feel like there's power in that, right? So the investing in yourself is a really important thing to
Definitely.
do. And so be that, attending conferences that, my firm is very good, gives a budget, but you go to one conference and that's like your budget. So with so much going on, or I've self-funded getting a certification. So for me, this is in lieu of maybe doing some of that travel, getting a certification. I'm gonna build something because
Yeah.
that's the best way you learn it, right?
That's how you learn. That's how you learn. It's so exciting. You know what you just mentioned, I'm doing the same. It's so beautiful when you get into it and you really, because it's that other vector, right? It's where our brains were when they just exploded a minute ago. It's hard to explain. I call it the Copernican moment, where you sort of have um, this sense of understanding where you are in the process. And it's kind of hard to explain when it's, vector or 3 dimensional, 4 dimensional, 5 dimensional, and how linear our thinking generally is and how agentic design doesn't follow linear paths. So I want to know more about, so it's essentially a DApp. It's a decentralized application at some point if we want to start to put the words that we have on it. And it will eventually live on chain somehow. You'll integrate that somehow with Solana or XRP, with Ripple or something, somewhere in there, Ethereum, because everything that you just said, when it gets to a point of defensibility or custody or even fiduciary responsibility, is going to have a record to it. So it's going to have to be on chain eventually. So that's what we studied how many years ago when we were talking about NFT
Right.
custody, right? So it's like, it blows my mind to hear that, because like we're still years out, but we're not really.
Mm-mm.
You know, the we I always use this analogy, like Einstein was working on the theory of relativity when he came across E equals mc squared. And we as a people, as a civilization, have worked down the path of E equals mc squared for a long, long time. And we're just now getting back to what he was really working on. He was working on relativity. And
Mhm.
that word relativity in your industry means something, which is
Yeah, it
why
does. Yeah.
has its own answer, which, as you were talking, I'm like, relativity. But that's where we are in space and time. That's what relativity is. So here we are, putting words back together and trying to be wordsmiths as we explore this new concept of agentic design. And we talk about things like chain of custody and provenance and, uh, dependencies. And the words are all starting to make sense, which that's why I was so excited to talk with you, because my head exploded when I saw what you were doing, because I've been connected with you for some years.
Yeah.
I watched you, we both sort of experimented together
Mhm.
so many ways. And then when you did this, I was like, oh my God, this totally makes sense. So as it becomes a product, there are marketplaces for it. Microsoft has a massive marketplace for this already in Azure AI Foundry that can be on or off prem. It doesn't need to be cloud based. It's just such an amazing time to watch, people build these things and create an emerging market.
I mean, I was kind of, well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate that feedback. And ultimately, I did a lot of I feel like in 2023, I was learning a lot about generative AI. In 2024, I was talking a lot about generative AI. And then I wanted, each year having a theme. I wanted 2025 to be building in AI because there's a certain point where you can talk and not build, but that I feel like that road is going to be fairly short,
Where
and
everybody
maybe,
is. Yeah, it's where everybody's just starting to adopt it, let alone be able to speak about it. And they have not really explored it, and they're definitely not building it.
yeah.
So
I'm lucky to have a friend and collaborator in Olga, and I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the process, but it does get me you talking about building it. Like, do you envision like we are on the cusp of just a wave of micro businesses out there where like people are just going to be creating, vibe coding with Claude Code. I don't know if like someone on LinkedIn shared, "Oh, you can download this thing from GitHub that's got a 100 agents that will help you come up with a business plan or it'll assess it." And I never downloaded anything from GitHub. I'd never played with Claude Code. I did it and I I had to use Claude to help explain a few things because, I'm dealing with like, the DOS prompts or whatever, which is not in my wheelhouse, but did it and like was playing around with business ideas and stuff like that, which I always love. I was like, oh, this would be a great business idea. This would be a great business idea. But like, I do think there's a big leap between like getting feedback versus actual execution. I feel like we're not like that lift of being entrepreneurial. My guess is it's not gonna be that high. I mean, do you think is that what you're seeing as well, Chris, that micro
Yeah.
businesses are gonna
So I got to back up a second until so what I've done a lot this year, it's August. Yeah, I guess it's all been this year. I started a workshop with my friend Charlie, and we started talking about innovation and ideation. And he built a tool that allows you to collect and contemplate ideas. And in that tool, the greater context is about innovation. Most of our organizations are still along that traditional path of R&D where they want to innovate, so they bring a bunch of smart people into a room and they come up with one sort of really good idea. But our technology is exponential. So we have to amplify innovation in a way in which it matches the technology with which we're building. So you just mentioned building, and then you mentioned your limitation. You recognize your limitation and you had another tool to use. So you went back to the tool and you asked the tool to be the tool, and the tool helped you. And then you got to the point where it was working. So you had some feedback that was affirmative in whatever it was that you were trying to build. And you're not a subject matter expert, but you did it. So that's exponential innovation, and my friend Ram uses the example of 30 steps. If you take 31-foot steps, you're 30 feet away. If you take 30 exponential steps, you're 26 times around the earth. So what you just did, what you just explained, used to take years, and it's still taking most traditional organizations years to put together that type of thinking because we're thinking like our grandparents in R&D. We're pulling subject matter experts in, but the machines do it better. So it's like, Ram also says it's like having 1,000 PhDs in your pocket. And it's getting to that point where, five just came out. We're at the beginning. This is nascent. So can you imagine like what you're thinking, that line of thinking that you just shared with us about using Claude and vibe coding and going back in and getting the function that you were intending as a result without being an SME, and how quickly you got there? That's exponential innovation. And we have to get our people and our organizations to be thinking along those lines because the technology that we're creating is already doing that. That's the human responsibility in the loop now. The human responsibility isn't to do the work. That document reviewer's butt in the seat is less important now. It's not important. It's less important now. That butt in the seat's job is to make sure that the systems are thinking either through accelerated innovation or exponential innovation so that we're getting better, faster, quicker, purer responses. It's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, we're gonna look back and go, ChatGPT 5, that's trash compared to what we have now. I mean, I'm not saying it's trash, people. I'm just saying, like, that's what future selves will say. It's, they'll
The
look
hell of a time to
back.
be alive. It's a hell of a time to be alive. And our generation, I went to a Jeffersonian dinner last night, which was amazing. I get to sit with really smart, creative people in the design industry, mostly in corporate interiors. And we were just talking about people and workplace and sort of the state of the union of where things are. And I'd mentioned that innovation was important and creativity is even more important. And that's something that's going to be very, very difficult as we work through the conscious machine into AI, artificial intelligence. We cannot leave creativity on the sideline.
Mm-mm.
We need to have much more beautiful
Yeah.
creativity than the machines currently have. And right now we're going to start with that logic and IQ, but it's going to take a while to build in those layers of beauty and those layers of EQ and that layer of creativity and beauty. And that's where I think the human role really comes in, is to build and to build with human beauty. And that's going to be pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, I've been thinking a lot about creativity and like the human element that like I just think that over time the human eye, it's like the how from just a consumer TikTok I think became so popular for many reasons, but I think one reason why is it gave a more authentic, less curated aesthetic, right? Because Instagram was getting like, "Oh, it's an over curated aesthetic." But really, all it's doing is it's following the norms set up by the algorithms. But until we get tired of that, and then our brain naturally, I think, wants to go to something that's a little bit different because it is interesting, right? And I think like just that process of going outside, touching grass like you talked about, I think that we were talking about earlier. I think that's really important in making sure like slowing down and building in that ability to think creatively. Like I love technology, but I also love like old school. Like my husband is an artist. He painted that. He paints a lot. He doesn't really like technology that much, and we talk a lot about this, and it's funny, like, one thing we talked about is how art advanced because of technological advances in paint, because
Absolutely.
paint as a technology, when there was an advance in paint being cheaper, more uh, cheaper and mass produced and not hand ground, the masters did underlay painting called a grisaille or brunei, where it's nearly like a monochrome painting underneath, and then you glaze the pigment on top of that. The reason why they did it is because the pigment was so expensive. But technological advances allowed for mass production of paint and for it to be and advances in the storage of the paint so it could be in a tube. And what came from that? Impressionism. Not long after that happened, we had impressionist painters, which then led to other like advances. In some way, the technology may set us free, where you're not having to like, have apprentices grind paint. You can be a little bit more agile in what you do. But at the end of the day, like it really is like that creativity that is so key. The human creativity, the human brain drives the creativity, not the technology. So if you think of the technology as paint, if you think of it as a screen print, if you think of it as anything like that, that's really, there's a hyperfixation on the technology and not, and I've said this before, like it really should be AI in the loop and not human in the loop, because I feel like human in the loop subverses our role in the use of that technology. We are the conductor. We are the ones driving the use of that tool, or we should be, and so I think it nearly like elevates the technology more than it should be. It's nearly like, it's a black box, it's an ancient alien effect. We don't want to acknowledge our own, unique thoughts and brains. But then on the flip side, we many people think, well, no machine could ever replicate what I do because everything I write is so important. But it's
Yeah.
again, it's going back to, we don't it's a spectrum of things, right? It's not binary. And there are some things that we write as humans that's, very repetitive, not imaginative, and maybe that would be well suited for a machine versus the next great American novel. Hopefully not a machine, hopefully humans writing that.
Yeah. So what you said is that sort of the thesis behind what I'm working on with pathway communities, and we'll talk about this some other time, maybe on your podcast at some point. But it's essentially at its core, it's taking process and turning it into product, and then turning product into technology, because the goal is to force the cost down. I'm trying to build stability in housing. I'm not trying to build affordable housing. I'm trying to build stability in housing. I don't necessarily think that a universal basic income is the answer, because I think that our extractive process in capitalism will then take that money back out of the economy because we buy. That's what we do. So, trying to move process into product and then product into technology it's kind of Moore's law, right? It's sort of, how do we drive the ability of functionality up and cost down over time? And I think that's something that we're seeing for sure in energy with the kilowatt hour. I think, I've seen a lot of research that we're going to have $0 energy, which is pretty interesting. That doesn't happen without physics and phase change. Something else has to be of value, and I think that value is gonna be compute. I think it's gonna be measured in what we see right now at MACS, max and flops, FLOPS, and then storage, because
Mhm.
all of this is gonna have to live somewhere. So it becomes real estate again, and that's where I call it total tenancy. Total tenancy is a trademark term that I filed for during COVID because I realized that total tenancy was going to be both the URL and IRL version of custody and tenancy. So that's just the real estate term for it.
Mhm.
So it really is fascinating that, even your example of art, that's exactly what it is. And everybody's worried and there's so much inflammation because there's so much unknown, because there's so much growth that's happening all at the same time. We started this conversation with it's a garden. You sow a couple of seeds before you know it. If you're not careful, you've got a vine and you've got an invasive and things are out of control. So
Yeah.
that's what's happening. Really, it's entropy that goes back to physics, and it's relativity. It's where we are in time and space. And we will reorganize, but our systems, our legacy systems can't keep up because they're mostly linear, because our thinking was fairly simplistic back then. And what I've been trying to spend most of my time doing, Cassie, and you too, subconsciously, is find the people who get the complexity and depth of system thinking so that we don't have to have that first orientation conversation around like where you are, because it's really about speed to conversation and speed accelerated innovation. So, I knew that you and I have had several conversations here. We're 53 minutes into this. We've gone pretty deep, pretty fast.
Mhm.
And that's the whole point of the Edge report. If I lost people along the way, screw them. That's the beauty of like finding this next is
Yeah.
finding that depth and having the conversation around what we're really actually doing right now.
Well, and I think, it's very interesting to think about, to go into maybe another deep pocket of we think of these LLMs and how powerful they are, but they're limited by the data they were trained on and maybe, other elements as well. But that's not all the data there is in human existence and human knowledge. There's a lot of historic records that are not in digital format. There may be some indigenous group, information that may not be easily available, or it's an oral record. It's not in a written record. And then also, I know that's at least on the eDiscovery side, we still have a bias towards text-based technology and not, other what is the impact of the image? What is the impact of the image in the sound, or image within the text? I mean, maybe LLMs are getting better at analyzing that. I do know that we still struggle with that in eDiscovery, and we've been working with analyzing data at high volumes in a very robust way for a very long time. And that is still a stumbling block. So, and I think like disparate data sources, when you're, and maybe, and that's where I think there's power in LLM technology in e-discovery is having that bird's eye view, because the way e-discovery generally works, it is an analysis and assessment at a per document basis. There's metadata, structured data that comes around it that you can create. And I think there's power there. So I think there's benefits to that. But it's a lot to think about, and then we start thinking of, what is absent, in essence, what didn't get indexed.
Yeah.
If it's not indexed, it's not found, and it doesn't exist anymore. So thinking of doing research, like what if you go to one of the libraries at Oxford that you have to request the book, or whatever. I mean, that's invaluable, important that high scholars go and seek out in a specialized way. Maybe that's not available. Maybe it is now. I don't know. But then you also think of, not every website lives forever. Sometimes we think it does, but it doesn't. There can be link rot.
Right. Yeah.
And then the increasing volume of synthetic data that is going out there. So it's not human created. It's just the AI slop, expo, joining the ranks of what's out there. So how will that start to impact these systems? I personally think, and I may be wrong, but I could foresee a future where LLMs and next gen of LLMs are built where it's trained on not like the data curation is not done as precisely just on the RAG library, but also on the training data set because and that takes time and effort to do, and it's not fun. There's something sexy about that, like that data categorization and organization, that's time consuming, expensive, and but there's value in that because the better curated is, I would imagine, we see that on the RAG side, but imagine the potential power there with LLM. Now, I've not built a LLM, I'm not an engineer, so this could be completely off base, but I just see like potential power there.
There's so much power there, and I think, we're gonna see the emergence of we were talking about sort of cold wallets, even think of it that way, where we're going to start to see AI compute that takes into account kilowatt hours and blends the rate, the utility into a token rate. And there'll be an exchange for those tokens. But in addition, there's going to be a marketplace for synthetic data. So
Mhm.
you'll be able to, rather than go through and organize like so many people do, agonizing process of organization and indexing, we'll be able to run synthetic data that assumes that it's data, just to test for things like expeditions, provenance, in chain of custody. That those things we won't have to actually use real data, we'll be able to use synthetic data. So that's I see that around the corner. My job is to see around the corner, and I see it within the next sort of. I try not to use time because I've been wrong so many times. Ram and I were talking about this the other day. I did a keynote for a bunch of global execs, real estate execs around Christmas time. You read Chris Dixon's book, Read, Write, Own?
I haven't read it though. I have a horrible
So
pile of
anyway,
books to read.
it's really just the quick and quick is that it's about the evolution of the internet, right? From the first version, which was Read, which we were part of, to Read Write, which we built essentially, and now Rewrite Own, which we're actually manipulating. So that's Web3. And I told them that LLMs and that intelligent automation and robotic process automation was really probably about 3 years out because I was trying to give them some context around Web3. Wow, turns out it was like 6 months. Because everything exploded this
Mhm.
year, and that's why I try to not use the
Yeah.
time analogy too much because macro is really hard to predict. But synthetic data and training synthetic data into LLMs for RAG to figure out things like efficiencies and custody are definitely going to be a big thing coming up soon. So investing in some way to create or format or index synthetic data, I think, might be an opportunity for the investor.
Yeah, I think, licensing of data could be, a way of the future, and whether it's synthetic data or well-curated data sets that, someone has, gotten in means that won't cause issues down the road. Another again, going back to the trust and estate attorney, personal data can be like, maybe an asset, like, if you bundle up all of your personal likenesses of yourself, like, what if there's a business in the future of businesses that will buy your likeness from you or from your grandparent that's passed away, and the assets around that, voice assets, video at different ages and different scenarios, like, that could all potentially be bundled up as an asset that
The Kathy bot, like, what if
Cassie bought, yeah.
you think about when you have those great conversations with people, you're like, God, I wish Cassie were here right now. She would love this. Well, what if you could be? You know
What
what
if
I
you
mean?
could
Like,
be? And what are the and then it's like, what are the ethics around that? What if I didn't want that and a family member after I passed away said, "Oh, heck yes, we're gonna get money off of her likeness."
well, we're gonna
Ka-ching.
have that's the surveillance capitalism side of things. That's a book out there. I can't pronounce her name, but it's called Surveillance Capitalism. It's a big fat book, and I plowed through it some years ago, and I went, "Oh my gosh," because we're gonna suck every dollar out of the economy before we build a new one. And surveillance capitalism is absolutely where we are right now. And that's the update, the terms of use, the new agreements. That's using all of our activity online right now to index and catalog and use inferences so that we can get to predictives. That becomes neural media. And that's a whole different conversation around like why that item ends up in your shopping basket. And you had you don't even remember picking it up. That's
Mhm.
because it was predetermined. So anyway, Cassie, this was awesome. We can talk for days on
Yes,
this,
we
and we
can.
will again, but I make a strong commitment to the listeners that I'll keep it at an hour. A
Okay.
lot of people have been awesome with me saying, "Hey, if I play you at 1.5 and I do a 30-minute, 36-minute workout, I can get the whole hour in." So don't go long. So thank you for your time. Where can people reach you if they want to find your work or if they want to pay attention besides maybe just LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active there. I have a podcast that I self-produce. It has 3 seasons. I've been on a hiatus because there is a limit to time. That is a scarce asset. And for me to build a product or, on this research project, I really can't do it. But you can go listen to the back catalog. I have 50 episodes where it's a one-on-one chat. It's called Cassie, where I talk to different people and how emerging technology is impacting their lives. Chris, of course, you were a guest. And it's not just limited to legal people or people who know about eDiscovery. I had my husband on, and I had, a friend of mine, my college roommate, who's now a dean of graduate studies at a university. So, talking to her about Gen AI and how it's impacting university life. So, find me there. Probably just Google my name and on YouTube and find my TEDx. So it's just 6 minutes. It's not too long. So
I'll put it all in the show links if that's all right with you or in the show notes. And I promise that it'll always be human when we do these things. I will not ever have my bot come in here. That just doesn't seem right to me. I'd rather build and then be humans. It's funny that we have to say that, but with so much Gen AI, it's there's going to have to be some sort of authentication process where we've
yeah.
consensus that you are actually speaking to me, whether it's a secret handshake or something.
Yes. It's so funny. I've been thinking about that. Like I've created sorry, I know we're over, but I'll say this really quickly. I like to create generative AI videos of me on HeyGen to kind of highlight how progressed this is. And like the tell for me, it's no longer the hands, but it's like the teeth. The teeth look like I just like got a full set of, implants from, some
Interesting.
sort of like crazy dentist doctor. Like I have a small mouth. It has my mouth like huge. So maybe technology will even impact our norms of beauty standards. Maybe we will embrace the imperfections because that shows us as the humans that we are. A typo will be cherished because you'll know that a human typed it until the machine starts replicating it. But anyway, that's,
Yeah, the flaws in nature, right? I think we
yes,
that's a really interesting conversation, and it goes down that path of moving from activity-based design to biophilics and, like, how important it is to get back to nature when you've been thrust into this kinda thinking all the time. So, why don't you do that this weekend? Promise me you will weed,
I
get
will.
outside, touch the grass. That's what I need to do. It's been a very techy week for me, a very emotive week, a lot about workplace. The workplace is weighing heavy on people these days, so
Mm,
it's gonna be a good weekend to kinda disconnect and maybe touch the grass. So, Cassie, thanks for the
I
hour. I
agree.
really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Yeah, this was fun. We'll talk soon.
All right. Bye.